114 surahs, and you have almost certainly been taught or quietly assumed that they are arranged by length. Longest at the front, shortest at the back, and the order is basically administrative, a filing system, nothing to see. That is wrong, and it is wrong in a specific and fascinating way, because the arrangement is not chronological, and it is not cleanly by length either. And here is the part that makes it a genuine puzzle instead of a triviality. The order was fixed, settled, recited in this exact sequence by the first generation and every generation since, deliberately, and not in the order the surahs were revealed. So somebody arranged 114 chapters into an order that is not the order they arrived in, and is not simply the order of their size, and then locked it. Which forces a question almost nobody thinks to ask, because we are all taught to read the Quran surah by surah, as if each one floats free of the ones beside it. Why this order? Not the order of the ayat inside a surah, the order of the surahs themselves. Why is Al-Baqarah second and not first? Why does the shortest surah not sit at the very end? Why do 7 surahs that all begin the same way cluster together in a block in the middle of the book? Why does the whole thing open the way it opens and close the way it closes? There is an answer, or at least there is a structure, and it has been studied for centuries under a formal name, and most Muslims have never once been walked through it. That is what this is. So here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to show you the 2 different orders the Quran actually has, because there are 2, and once you see that there are 2, you cannot unsee it. Then, I am going to take the length theory, the one you were taught, and show you exactly where it breaks, on purpose. Then we are going to read the opening as a deliberate gateway, look at the thematic blocks hiding in plain sight, and finally stand back and look at the whole book as a single shape, with a front, a back, and a center. And I am going to be honest with you at every step about where this is solid scholarship and where people have taken it too far, because this is a topic that attracts a lot of nonsense, and the true version is more interesting than the nonsense, and does not need any help. Stay to the end, because the shape of the whole thing only appears at the end. Here is where we start, with the fact that the Quran has 2 orders. Most people know one. You open a mushaf, and Al-Fatiha is first, Al-Baqarah is second, and it runs down to An-Nas at 114. That is the order every printed Quran on earth uses. It is called the Taqifai order, or the Uthmani order, the fixed arrangement of the written text. But that is not the order it came down in. The revelation arrived over roughly 23 years, in pieces, responding to events, and the sequence of arrival is completely different. This is the Nuzuli order, the order of revelation. And the scholars of the Quran tracked it carefully, because knowing when something was revealed matters enormously for understanding it. Which verses came in Makkah under persecution, and which came in Medina when there was a community to govern. And the 2 orders are not close. They are wildly different. The first revelation, the 5 ayat that began everything, Iqra bismi rabbika, read in the name of your Lord, are the opening of Surah Al-Alaq. And where does Al-Alaq sit in the written mushaf? Number 96, near the back. The first words ever revealed are almost at the end of the book. Surah Al-Fatiha, which opens the written Quran, was not the first thing revealed. Surah Al-Baqarah, sitting at number 2, is among the surahs whose revelation stretched into the late Madinan period, some of the last material to be completed. It is placed almost first, and it finished almost last. So sit with what that means. Somebody took the chronological order, the natural order, the order of arrival, and set it aside, and in its place put a completely different sequence. If you wanted the simplest, most defensible arrangement, you would just keep them in the order they came. That is not what happened. The chronological order exists, it was known, it was preserved, and it was deliberately not used for the mushaf. The order in your hands is a choice, a second, overriding arrangement laid on top of the first. And there is a second, quieter proof of the same thing, and it is even harder to explain away. Every surah is classified as either Makki or Madani, revealed before the migration to Medina or after. And these 2 categories are not blocked off from each other in the mushaf, they are interleaved. A long Madani surah, Al-Baqarah, sits at the front, then more Madani material. But scattered all through the book, between and among them, sit Makki surahs from years earlier. The written order does not keep the early Makkan revelation in one half and the later Medinan revelation in the other. It shuffles them together according to some other logic entirely. Think about what that rules out. If the arrangement were even loosely chronological, the Makki and Madani surahs would fall into two broad zones, early then late. They do not. A surah revealed in the first years of the mission can sit right beside one revealed in the last, because whatever governs the order, it is not time. Time was available as an organizing principle. It was the obvious one. And it was set aside in favor of something that repeatedly places a chapter from year 20 next to a chapter from year 2. That is not what a filing clerk does. That is what an author does. And you might reasonably ask, why not just keep it chronological? Would the order of revelation not be the most natural, most honest way to arrange it? And the answer reveals something about what the Quran is trying to be. A chronological Quran would be a history of the mission. It would read as a diary, bound to its moment, a record of what was said in year 3 and year 9. Useful, but dated, anchored to events that are over. The Mushaf order breaks that anchor on purpose. By lifting the surahs out of time and arranging them by theme and function instead, the arrangement turns a 23-year sequence of responses into a single, timeless structure. It stops being the story of what happened to one community in one desert and becomes a book addressed to anyone, in any century, who opens it. The chronological order tells you when. The Mushaf order tells you what it means, permanently, detached from when. That is why the order of revelation was preserved by the scholars as a tool for understanding, but the order of the Mushaf was the one fixed for recitation. Two orders, two purposes. One remembers the history, the other outlives it. And here's something most people miss. The majority of scholars held that this arrangement, the Mushaf order, is tawqifi, fixed by instruction, not by editorial taste. Meaning the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, placed the surahs where they are, under guidance, and the companions preserved that placement. There is a minority scholarly view that some of the arrangement was settled by the companions using their own judgment, and that is an old and respectable disagreement, and I am not going to flatten it. But notice that on both views, the order is not random and it is not merely chronological. Somebody who understood this text far better than we do put these chapters in this sequence and considered the sequence to be part of how the book is meant to be received, which means the order carries meaning. And if the order carries meaning, then the length theory you are taught cannot be the whole story. So let us go break it. But first, one piece of history, because it tells you the order was taken seriously by the people closest to the source. Every surah in the Quran opens with the Basmala, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. Every single one, with exactly one exception. Surah At-Tawbah, number 9, begins cold, with no Basmala at all. It is the only one. And in a narration recorded in Sunan Abu Dawud, Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhuma, asked Uthman, radiyallahu anhu, about this directly during the compilation of the Mushaf. Why did you put Al-Anfal, which is one of the shorter surahs, together with Bara'ah, which is At-Tawbah, one of the longer ones, and not write the line of the Basmala between them? And Uthman's answer is the thing to hear. He explained that Al-Anfal was among the earliest surahs revealed in Madinah, and Bara'ah among the very last, and that their contents so resembled one another that he thought Bara'ah belonged with it, and so they were placed together without the dividing line. Read what just happened in that exchange. The people responsible for the written Quran are reasoning, out loud, about which surah belongs next to which, on the grounds of theme and content. The question of arrangement, of what pairs with what, and what follows what, is being handled with deliberation at the very moment the Mushaf takes its final shape. The order was not thrown together. It was considered, by the first generation, as something that mattered. Now, with that in hand, let us break the length theory. The length theory sounds right, and that is exactly why it survives. Open the Mushaf, and the long surahs really are at the front. Al-Baqarah, the longest, is near the beginning. The tiny surahs, 3 and 4 and 5 ayat each, really are clustered at the back. Skim it, and you will conclude, reasonably, that it is sorted longest to shortest and move on. But watch what happens the moment you stop skimming. Al-Fatiha, 7 ayat. It is not long, and it is first. before the 286 ayat of Al-Baqarah. If the rule were length, the opening surah is a violation of the rule on page 1. Keep going. The surahs do not actually descend smoothly. They descend in a rough, lurching way, with the trend going downward but with constant local exceptions, and some of those exceptions are not small. Surah Al-Kahf comes before Surah Taha, but that is inside the trend. Then you hit places where a longer surah sits after a shorter one for no length-based reason at all. And here is the cleanest break, the one that ends the length theory by itself. Look at the middle of the book, in the 50s and 60s by surah number. Surah Al-Hadid, number 57, has 29 ayat. A few surahs later, Surah Al-Mujadila, Al-Hashr, and onward, you find surahs of similar and varying lengths that are not in descending order among themselves. The block does not sort internally by size. Something else is holding it together, and we are going to see what in a minute, because it is one of the most beautiful features in the whole arrangement. So the length theory is not wrong so much as it is a decoy. Length is clearly a factor. The general drift really is long to short, but length is riding on top of something else, and wherever length and that something else disagree, the something else wins. The arrangement uses length as a loose default, and then overrides it whenever it has a reason to, and you can feel the override most clearly at the seams, at the exact points where a long surah follows a shorter one, or where a cluster refuses to sort itself by size. Those seams are not sloppiness. A clerk sorting by length would never produce them. They are the fingerprints of the other principle pressing up through the length ordering, the places where meaning was allowed to win the argument. Once you learn to notice the seams, you stop reading the mushaf as a list that got slightly out of order and start reading it as a structure that is holding two forces in tension on purpose. Which means the real question is, what are the reasons? What is the something else? And the first place you can see it with total clarity is the very first surah. Al-Fatiha is the strongest single piece of evidence that this arrangement is intentional, because there is no length-based reason for it to be first, and there is an overwhelming meaning-based reason. Look at what Al-Fatiha actually is. 7 short ayat. It opens with praise. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the most merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. Then it turns to direct address. It is you alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. And then it becomes, for its entire second half, a single request. Idinas Sirat al-Mustaqim. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not of those who earned anger, nor of those who went astray. That is the whole surah. It is a plea for guidance. It ends on a request and does not answer it. It leaves your hand open. Now turn the page. Surah Al-Baqarah. And the first thing it says, after the opening letters, is this. Dalika al-Kitab, la rayba fi, hudan lil mutakin. This is the book, in which there is no doubt, a guidance. You asked for guidance. You turned the page. The next word is guidance. That is not an accident of filing. You cannot get that from length. Al-Fatiha is placed first because it is the doorway, and a doorway has a specific job. It frames what you are about to walk into. The surah teaches you how to approach everything that follows. You do not begin the Quran with information. You begin it on your knees, asking to be guided, and then the rest of the book arrives as the response to that request. Think about how deliberate that is. Of all the ways to open the most important book in a civilization, the arrangement chose to open it not with a claim, not with a law, not with a story, but with the reader asking a question. The entire Quran is framed as an answer to a human being who opened their hands and asked to be shown the way. And there is a reason this particular surah, of all of them, was placed at the gate. It is the one surah every Muslim recites in every unit of every prayer 5 times a day for a lifetime. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said in a narration in Sahih Bukhari that there is no prayer for the one who does not recite the opening of the book. So the surah that stands at the door of the mushaf is also the surah standing at the door of every single prayer. It is the most repeated passage in the life of a believer. Placing it first is not just framing the book. It is telling you that the way in is the same way in every time. You begin by asking to be guided. Every prayer restarts the journey at the gate. And notice that Al-Fatiha is called, in the tradition, Asab al-Mathani, the 7 oft repeated. 7 ayat, meant to return, again and again. The gateway is not a thing you pass through once. It is a threshold you cross thousands of times, each time reopening your hands and asking the same thing, before walking back into the answer that fills the rest of the book. That is a gateway. That is design. And once you have seen the gateway, you start seeing the blocks. Quick word before we continue, because I need something small from you. If this is landing, if you are looking at the front of the mushaf differently than you did 10 minutes ago, tap that like button. It costs you nothing, and it is the entire reason a serious 30-minute breakdown reaches the people who want it, instead of losing to a 30-second clip that gets the whole thing wrong. And subscribe, because we are building something here, one piece at a time. We took apart Rama. We took apart Taqwa. We built the ladder of the hereafter. We stood in front of the king with no name. To everyone who keeps showing up for the long ones, thank you. You are why these get made. Now let us find the hidden blocks, because once you see the first one, the whole middle of the book reorganizes itself in front of you. Here is a thing that is sitting in plain sight in every mushaf, and almost nobody has had it pointed out to them. There is a group of surahs scattered across a stretch of the book that all begin the same way. They open by declaring that everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies Allah, or commanding that He be glorified. In Arabic, the opening word is a form of the root sabaha, to glorify. Sabaha lillahi ma fis samawati wal ard. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Allah. These are called the musabihat, the glorifying surahs. And here is the interesting part. If you list them, they are Al-Isra, then Al-Hadid, Al-Hashr, As-Saf, Al-Jumu'ah, At-Taghabun, and Al-Ala. And notice something. Several of them are consecutive or nearly consecutive. Al-Hadid at 57, then Al-Hashr at 59, As-Saf at 61, Al-Jumu'ah at 62, At-Taghabun at 64. They cluster. They are grouped in the same neighborhood of the mushaf, opening with the same note of glorification, one after another. Now I am going to be precise, because this is where people overreach. The scholars did not all count the musabihat the same way. Some counted 5, some 7, some 9, depending on exactly which opening forms you include. So this is not a rigid sealed set with a fixed number. But the phenomenon is real and undisputed. There is a run of surahs in the middle of the Quran that share an opening formula of glorification and sit near each other. And the different opening forms are themselves patterned. Some open in the past tense, sabaha, glory was declared. Some in the present, yusabihu, glory is being declared. The past tense ones and the present tense ones are not randomly mixed. The tradition read the shift as deliberate, declaring the glorification of Allah across past, present, and continuing time. And they are not the only block. There is another, more famous one. There are 7 surahs that all open with the same 2 disconnected letters, Ha, Mim, Ghafir, Fusilat, Ash-Shura, Az-Zukhruf, Ad-Dukhan, Al-Jathiyah, Al-Ahqaf. Surahs 40 through 46. 7 surahs, consecutive, no gaps, every single one opening with Ha-Mim. They are called the Hawamim, and they sit together in an unbroken block in the order of the mushaf. 7 chapters in a row that announce themselves with the same 2 letters and share themes, and were understood by the scholars as a family, and they are not merely sharing an opening. Read across them, and they share a subject. The Hawamim circle again and again around revelation itself, the sending down of the book, the response of the people who receive it, and the fate of earlier nations who were sent messengers and turned away. Ghafir opens on the revelation of the book from Allah, the Mighty, the Knowing, and moves into the story of a believer in the family of Pharaoh who hid his faith. Fusilat, the next one, describes a book whose verses were made distinct, an Arabic Quran for people who know. Ash-Shura speaks of how Allah reveals to the Prophet as He revealed to those before him. Read one after another. They feel less like 7 separate chapters and more like 7 movements of one composition, each opening with the same 2 notes, Ha, Mim, before it begins. That is why the tradition named them together, and why the arrangement keeps them together. Break the block apart to sort strictly by length, and you would be cutting through a single sustained meditation on what it means for God to send down a book and for human beings to accept or refuse it. Stop and think about what that does to the length theory, finally and completely. 7 consecutive surahs held together by their opening, not their size. The Hawamim are not all the same length. They are grouped by how they begin and what they carry, and the arrangement kept them together as a unit, even where that cuts against a clean descent by length. So, the arrangement is not sorting by size, it is grouping by kinship. Surahs that belong together are placed together, the glorifying ones near the glorifying ones, the Hamim ones in an unbroken block, and length is allowed to bend around those groupings. This is what we meant by the something else. The mushaf is arranged thematically and formally, in families, and length is only the loose background against which the families are placed. And once you accept that the book is arranged as a designed whole rather than a sorted pile, you can ask the biggest question of all, not what is next to what is the shape of the entire thing? And it has one. It has a front and it has a back, and they answer each other. Look at how the Quran opens and how it closes, and put the two side by side, because they were meant to be seen together. It opens with Al-Fatiha, and we said what Al-Fatiha is, a plea for guidance. Guide us to the straight path, the reader, at the threshold, asking to be shown the way. Now go to the very end. The last surah, 114, is An-Nas, mankind. And what is An-Nas? Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the retreating whisperer, who whispers in the chests of mankind. An-Nas is a plea for refuge, protection from the whisper that pulls a person off the path. Now hold the two ends of the book in your two hands and read them as one sentence. The Quran opens with a human being asking to be guided onto the straight path. The Quran closes with a human being asking to be protected from the thing that would pull them off it. The first surah asks for the road. The last surah asks for help staying on the road. That is a frame. That is a book that knows it is a journey. It begins the moment you ask for direction, and it ends with you still walking, asking for cover against the one enemy that works from the inside, right up to the final word. The last word of the Quran is An-Nas, mankind. The book closes on the human being it has been speaking to the entire time, still exposed, still asking, still on the path. You could not design a more coherent set of bookends if you sat down to write them on purpose. The request at the front and the request at the back are the same person at two moments of the same journey, and that person is you, holding the book, which is the entire point of ending on the word mankind. And the symmetry goes deeper than the theme, into the grammar. Al-Fatiha begins with the servant speaking of Allah in praise, and then turns to speaking directly to him. Iyyaka na'budu, you alone we worship. And Nas begins with the servant taking hold of Allah, seeking refuge in him, naming him 3 times over, Rab and Nas, Malik and Nas, Ilah and Nas, Lord, King, God of mankind. The book opens by praising him from a distance and drawing near. It closes by grabbing on. That is the arc of an entire spiritual life, compressed into the first and last surahs. You begin by acknowledging him. You end by clinging to him, because by then you have walked the road and you know what is out there. And there is one more piece of the bookend that is easy to miss. Al-Fatiha is a supplication that Allah taught the servant to say. An-Nas is a supplication that Allah taught the servant to say. The book that is God speaking to humanity opens and closes with words he gave humanity to speak back to him. The first and last things in the mushaf are not statements from above. They are prayers placed in your mouth. The book hands you your half of the conversation at both ends. And if the front and the back answer each other, then the book has an axis, and an axis has a center. Now, I have to be very careful, because this is exactly the point where this topic gets hijacked. There is a popular claim you will find all over the internet that goes like this. There are 114 surahs, so the exact middle is Surah 57. And Surah 57 is Al-Hadid, which means iron. And iron has 26 protons. And the core of the earth is iron. And therefore the Quran secretly encoded the atomic structure of iron at its mathematical center. And it usually comes with more numbers, gematria, verse counts, the whole apparatus. I want to be direct with you. That specific package comes out of a numerological movement, and it does not hold up, and I am not going to sell it to you, because the moment I hand you a shaky claim to make the video more exciting, I have spent the trust this channel runs on. 114 divided by 2 is not cleanly a single center surah. The atomic and geological add-ons are the same style of after-the-fact number fitting that a motivated person can do with almost any text. Set it aside, but do not throw out the real thing underneath it, because there is a real thing underneath it, and it is quieter and better. Surah al-Hadid does sit in the central region of the Mushaf, in that middle stretch of the book, right at the head of the glorifying block we just looked at. And forget the atomic numerology entirely and just read what the surah is about. It is about spending in the way of Allah, about the wealth in your hands not really being yours. And it contains one of the most staggering verses in the Quran about the nature of Allah himself. Huwa al-awwal wal-akhir, waz-zahir wal-batin. He is the first and the last, the manifest and the hidden. And the iron itself, in verse 25, is introduced with a purpose that has nothing to do with protons. And we sent down iron, in which is great might and benefits for people. Iron as the material of justice and strength, given to a community that was being told, in that exact period, to stand firm and to give. So here is the honest version, and it is enough. Near the heart of the book sits a surah about strength, sacrifice, and a God who is simultaneously the first and the last, the outer and the inner. You do not need it to be the mathematical midpoint. You do not need iron to be a chemistry lesson. The surah earns its place by what it says, sitting in the central region of a book that opens asking for guidance and closes asking for refuge. The center of the journey is a call to stand firm and to spend, anchored to the name of the one who is the first and the last. That is real, it is textual, and it does not require a single trick. And notice why the honest version is actually the stronger one for you as a viewer. The numerology version asks you to be impressed by a coincidence of counting that you cannot check and that falls apart when you do. The textual version asks you to open the surah and read it, and when you read it, it delivers. Because Al-Hadid genuinely is a chapter about holding firm and giving in a hard hour, genuinely does place the name of the first and the last near the middle of the book, and genuinely does open the run of glorifying surahs. Nothing about that needs defending against a mathematician. It is just there, on the page, for anyone who reads instead of counts. The people who reach for the atomic number trick are trying to prove the Quran is designed. They did not need to. The design was already sitting in the plain meaning of the words, which is where it always was. And that is the whole discipline of this, by the way, and I want to name it before we close, because it has a name and a library. The study of why the surahs sit where they sit, and how each connects to its neighbors, is a formal science in the Quranic tradition called Ilm al-Munasabat, the science of correspondences. The towering work is by a scholar named al-Bikai, who wrote an entire multi-volume tafsir reading the whole Quran for these connections, and who described sitting for months on a single link between two passages. As Suyuti wrote on it, Al-Garnati wrote on it. This is not a modern invention, and it is not internet numerology. It is centuries old, careful, and largely unknown to the people who recite this book every day. So put the whole shape together now, the thing we could only see at the end. The Quran is not a sorted pile of chapters. It has two orders, the order it arrived in and the order it was fixed in, and it deliberately chose the second and set the first aside, lifting the whole book out of time. It interleaves the early and the late, the Makki and the Madani, so that no part of it is trapped in its own moment. It uses length as a loose default and then overrides it, on purpose, wherever meaning demands. It opens with a deliberate gateway, a surah that is nothing but a plea for guidance, the same plea you repeat at the start of every prayer, so that everything after it arrives as the answer. It groups its surahs into families, the glorifying ones, the hamim ones, placed together by kinship rather than size. It frames the entire book between a request for guidance at the front and a request for refuge at the back, the same traveler at two ends of one road, holding words God placed in his mouth for both. And near its heart it places a call to stand firm, tied to the one who is the first and the last. That is not a filing system. That is architecture. And it was sitting in the mushaf you already own the whole time, and nobody was taught to look. If this changed how you will open the Quran tomorrow, do two things before you go. Leave a comment and tell me which piece did it, whether it was the first revelation sitting at Surah 96, or the guidance answered the instant you turn past Al-Fatiha, or the two ends of the book turning out to be the same person asking twice, because the ones you write genuinely reach the person who needed them. And subscribe, because we are building this thing one piece at a time, and there is more coming. May Allah teach us this book the way it was arranged, and not merely the way we are in a hurry to read it. May He place us among those who ask. At the front of the journey, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path, and who are protected, at the end of it, from the whisper that pulls the heart off the road. And may the surah we open tomorrow find us reading it as part of a whole, the way it was always meant to be read. You asked to be guided. Turn the page. The answer has been there the entire time.